Hi everybody, welcome to Start Talk. My name is Aaron Thomas and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Start.ca. Joined with me is Peter Rocca, the CEO of Start.ca. Peter, how are you?
Doing good today.
Great. We have a wonderful edition of this program again where you get to go behind the scenes and ask questions to the CEO and other high-level members of a telecom company and get some of the inside scoops on things you've always wanted to know. So let's start this off with some TV questions that we have. So Dwight has a simple question. Will Start TV be available to businesses?
So not initially. We're still going to have to do a lot of work before we get into commercial space. So for businesses and being able to show content in a business location as opposed to a home requires completely different content right negotiations with all of the channel providers. And it's something that, we'll definitely take a look at. But unfortunately, the work that we're doing for content rate negotiation on the residential side wouldn't apply to businesses. So maybe something we'll look at in the future, but nothing that we have a timeline on yet.
Great answer. Down this list, we're going to keep going. And Jamie writes in and says, when you are posting prices on your website for TV, when can I expect to see a price?
Yeah, great question. And probably the number one question we still get. So we're still working on some of the bits and pieces to be able to launch the product. We've got we're kind of in this internal beta testing process right now, make sure that we can get it up to the speed that we want, the polish. Things are going well, but for competitive reasons, we won't be able to kind of let everyone know what the price is on those plans until we put them online with the actual channel lineups and packages and stuff. But we are working really hard internally, and things have been going well on the internal testing. So hopefully we'll have some more information soon on that.
Great. Brian writes in and says, will TV be a cable service or an IPTV service? And also, will it have all the major networks?
So first question, definitely IPTV. So it's an over-the-top. It's going to use your internet connection to get the content to you. And in terms of the major networks, yeah, absolutely. So there's the A&Es and the AMCs, the Sportsnets and TSNs, all those kind of channels will be available on it.
Great. So moving on from TV, which we had to cut a few questions off for TV, so I apologize. Let's get into a question that Freddie asks. Once fiber to the home is finalized, how soon will someone be able to sign up, and is there a waiting list?
So is this, I guess the question would be whether or not this is fiber to the home, as we talked a little bit about kind of with the large players and
Yes.
competitors getting access to it. If that's the case, so they're still going through the configuration process. So on, I think it was September 8th, so just recently they had to put forth an initial costing. So there's still some configuration issues, whether or not those get sorted out before. I think they'll get sorted out before the end of the year. But then there's going to be kind of a time where people have to start building the infrastructures to connect to all these different POPs. And I think that's going to still take a little while. And unlike the regime was previously in an aggregated solution, it won't be the entire footprint all of a sudden. So if we're talking about kind of the regulated tariff wholesale services, unfortunately, we're likely going to be looking into next year. If we're talking about the fiber that we're doing, then there are some areas that there's not necessarily a waiting list, but that you could pre-register your building to and let us know, and we can get you on a registration list and see whether or not try to put together a timeline on when we'd be coming to that building.
No, that's great. More about fiber. We have a question from Ann, and Ann says, love your service. Thank you. Unfortunately, I live in an FTTP building that the owners say they have an agreement with another provider. I have read that the CRTC has changed the rules that allows all providers to have access, meaning letting third parties into the building. What can you do to get fiber installed into a building like this? Thanks.
Great question. So this is actually one of the challenges we have with our own fiber build, is in some of that education process in terms of what the obligations of apartment buildings are in terms of providing access, competitive access to a building. So I think it was, I'm going to get the year wrong, but somewhere, let's just say it was in the mid to late 2000s, there was a proceeding that came out, and I don't remember the exact number, but it ruled on competitive access to apartment buildings. And there's been a few challenges since then in terms of if you're a condo versus an apartment. But ultimately, the government has ruled every single time that there's been a challenge that competitors should be allowed access to buildings. Now, just to clarify, that's a little bit different than the FTTH thing that we're talking about in regulated wholesale services. Just because there's an obligation to let a competitor into your building doesn't necessarily mean that they can use fiber that might already be there. So let's say one provider has provided fiber into a building. That decision doesn't allow a competitor to use that fiber. It allows the competitor to bring their own fiber into that building. But there are the exclusivity agreements that used to be like in the late 90s and early 2000s. All of those have gone away. So what I would suggest doing if they're having a challenge with if there's a competitor that wants to come in and this tenant is having a problem getting their landlord to allow access, maybe what we can do in the comments is I can look up what that file number is, and they can just provide access to, or let their landlord know about it, and provide a little bit of education service there.
Great. Is there could they reach out to the CRTC or to somebody else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most building owners, the concern that they have is they may not know who this other company is, and so sometimes for newer companies, it's just always been easier to let the big guys come into the buildings. But in a lot of situations, the smaller local, and sometimes they're not so small and they're not so local, competitors that want to bring fiber into that building as well, really do provide competition to the end user, and that's why the decision was made to ensure that the end users have competitive access. So it might just simply be an education thing, and the landlords may be unaware. A lot of the buildings were built prior to this decision coming out, and so they may not have been aware of their obligations, and sometimes just knowing about it might start the conversation. But if they ran into a roadblock, the CRTC would always be there to help them out.
And this is another question from Brody, and it says, how can you overcome a competitor's ability to install their fiber equipment in condos? And then they write on to say, I have a fiber translator in my closet.
Okay, so that's so the first part of that I think is what we just talked about,
Yep.
which is about
I agree.
Another competitor coming in. The second part of that about having a fiber ONT or optical network termination unit in their building already is going to be somebody else's. So that would be kind of, but on the regulated service is getting access to that. So I know that sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. People think, fiber is fiber and it's in my building and I should be able to use it. So there's still, on the regulated side, that's shared access. And then on the non-wholesale tariff side is equal access.
Gotcha. So one of the questions that we get all the time at the service desk, and I hear quite a bit, and I'm going to ask you this, it's from Sean who wrote in, it says, why don't Start.ca technicians show up when something is scheduled?
Well, first of all, my apologies for that. I know how frustrating it is when things don't go as planned. So maybe I'll just share maybe a couple stats first, and then walk it back if we have time to talk about where the technicians come from and how they're scheduled. So first of all, we do thousands of orders every month, and the vast majority of them go as scheduled and planned. Technicians are there, they're courteous, they do their work, everything's installed and up and running, super happy customers. It's the unfortunate, whether that's 1% or 0.5% or whatever the number of those installs, at volume that's still 10, 20, 30 people a month, that have some sort of inconvenience with a missed install. So, that's a number that's, still a big number. I mean, we don't want to have anybody miss an installation. Some of those, if you take a look at, break those numbers down and say, of those missed installs, and I'm not sure for this person's specific situation, but a good portion of those missed installs are, what I would put in the realm of accidental on the customer side. And again, no blame, just what happens sometimes is people forget to answer their phone when the technician calls. life happens and they forget that there was somebody coming by. Life happens and they're in the bathroom and having a shower, or and they miss the. We've seen broken buzzers, door codes don't work. Like there's a lot of other reasons, and then there's the legitimate technician just doesn't show. And for those ones, there's a whole scenario. The job before them took longer. Somebody is sick, has their own personal or family, something that has taken them out of that schedule and they weren't able to complete the job. And there's always some that we have some challenges with working with third-party vendors. But for the vast majority, the experience for the customers is very positive. But like I said, that doesn't help out the people that when it goes wrong.
I think it would be a good idea for us to do a little bit of a bonus segment about why independent companies and telecoms have to provide the technicians from a third party. I think that would be a really good bonus video that we can do right after this one.
Sure, absolutely, and we'll tie it right in because I think understanding the whole process and how we have to work with those third-party lines is a great segue. So
yeah, very important.
Look for a bonus one right after this.
It's coming up, I promise. Okay, so other than that, we've got two more questions here. So one of the questions that I love this question. How do you remain focused on customer service and not fall into the same categories as some of your competitors?
Oh, I think it sounds like an answer out of a book or something, but the easy one is, you shouldn't be looking at your competitors, you should be looking forward and forging your own path forward. So we don't really look and say, oh, well, how do we just be better than our competitors? We look and say, how can we provide the best customer experience to our customers? And that just goes, through absolutely everything we do. Everything we look at, we figure out, what is the best experience that we can make for our customers and then make it happen. So it's the core of what we are, who we are, why we're different. And you can hear it when you talk to the people on the phone and the exchanges and emails, and even when you come in, people greeting you at the door. It's customer service is that's what we are, and it's been our heart and soul for over 20 years.
It's amazing. Last but not least, what are some of the things, and this comes from Corey, what are some of the things that you wished customers knew that you did behind the scenes to make your service better, beyond billing, speeds, and beyond modems? What are some of the things that make us behind the scenes that we do?
That's a great question. There's a lot of areas, so if you can really look at the whole life cycle of, how we interact in all areas. The work that so many teams do that nobody ever sees, the provisioning teams and the quality assurance teams to make sure that, orders go out right, and that that we're, ensuring that we have a consistent and friendly experience, and help coach our agents through their life cycle here as well. But on a tech side, which is I'm on the tech and geeky side, I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize is the amount of investment that goes into the network side of things. So things that we do, redundancy, of course, two of everything, redundant paths, all the kind of everything that we can do to ensure that we don't have single points of failure, so that we can things break, and all electronics things break at some point in time. So having redundancy is key. But more than that, one of the things that we do, and gamers probably know this, but other people who are not in the gaming community might not know, is that we invest a lot in extending our network out to other providers. So connecting our network, for example, to the Googles and the Netflixes and the Akamais and the Time Warners, and basically rather than relying on other people to kind of bridge the gap between other networks and our networks, as we have facilities, for example, in Toronto and Chicago and New York, that allow us to get closer and interconnect directly with those networks. And some people might say, do you do that to save money? And absolutely not. It costs a lot more to do that than just to use an intermediary to connect you. But it's about performance and reliability, not having to rely on those other providers to connect you, and you know that you're going to have optimal performance for those. So really, it provides a more smooth and lower latency for the gamers out there by making sure that we eliminate as many paths between us and the actual people that are communicating at A to Z.
That's great. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to have some more questions that you'd like to go behind the scenes once again at Start.ca and really understand a friendly telecom, you can go on Facebook or all of our social media and ask those questions, and we will respond as we do on Start Talk. My name is Aaron Thomas, Marketing Director here at Start.ca, and this is Peter Rocca, CEO of Start.ca.
And normally I say Z, but for some reason A to Z is how we talk in the telephone world. But I do say Z on a regular basis.
He does. I can confirm.
All right.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks a lot. Take care.